Hello, my awesome scientist. Welcome to your first flipped video. So this is kind of what it'll look like every time you have a flipped video to watch for homework, and you'll have one to 2 times a week, and they'll be anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes. Today's might be today's might be a little longer just because it's our first time, so I want to explain a couple things to make sure that we understand how this process is going to work. So every time you watch a video, it'll ask you to do a couple different things. The purpose of it is to learn some new vocabulary, get some notes, and then come to class prepared the next day so that we are ready to investigate and put into practice the vocabulary and the notes and the science concepts that we learned the night before. So it's really, really important that every time you're assigned a video, you are watching it so that way we can use our class time to investigate and ask questions instead of always note-taking. So tonight, your first video is going to be on the 3 types of variables that we find in a scientific investigation. And it's really important that you understand the difference between the 3, and that when you're given a testable scientific question, you can pick out those 3 variables. So what you're going to need is your journal, and you will need to turn to page 10 in your journal. So remember, in class we did a lab on page 11 today, or we started a lab on page 11. You are going to be taking notes on page 10, that page that we left blank. So it's really important that you're always on the right page. So remember, we did this today. Your notes are going to go on this page. Obviously mine are filled in, but yours are not yet. But you will be on page 10. First thing I'm going to do is teach you your 3 new vocabulary words. So your job right now is to listen, do the motions with me, and then after we've discussed the 3 and I've shown you a couple of things, then you will turn to page 10 and you will copy down the notes that I will put up in just a little bit. But it's really, really important that you're listening to the whole video, not just the note-taking part, so that you're prepared to show me the motions tomorrow and show me that vocabulary that you've learned. All right, so a variable it's one component of our scientific investigation. So we will always have 3 variables. We will have the independent variable, the dependent variable, and the control variables. Okay, so let's start with the independent variable. And when we talk about an independent variable, we're always going to do this. So this is our independent variable. Independent starts with the letter I. The independent variable is the variable or the thing in the experiment that I change. So I, independent variable, I change. That's what we're going to do for independent. It's what I change. When you set up your experiment, it is literally the thing that you change in that investigation. So remember when we talked about that moldy bread experiment, that question, does the temperature affect the growth of mold on bread? So the thing that I would change is I would put the bread in 3 different temperatures. That's what I'm physically changing. I'm putting the bread here, I'm putting it in a hot temperature, I'm putting it in a cold temperature, I'm putting it in a warm temperature. That's what I did. Okay, so that is the independent variable, what you change, what I change in the actual setup of the experiment. All right, so that's the independent variable. On the other hand, we have the dependent variable. The dependent has that base word depend. Okay, if you depend on someone, then you're relying on them. They have to do something for you. So that's a good way to remember your dependent variable, because your dependent variable is going to depend on the independent variable. So whatever I change, however I change it, that's going to affect my dependent variable. The dependent variable is your result. It's what you observe, what you record, what you measure. That is your dependent variable. That's what all that data is. Because I changed this independent variable, something's going to happen. Okay, so because I changed the temperature of that bread, it's going to grow. The mold's going to grow differently on all 3 pieces of bread because I changed the temperature of each piece. Okay, so it's like a cause and effect. The independent would be the cause, the what I did to change it. The dependent would be the effect. Those are the complicated ones to remember, the independent and the dependent. The easy ones are the controls. The control variables, everything that stays the same. So it's the constant. Constant is just a fancy word for what stays the same. It's the same throughout. When I set up that moldy bread experiment, I have to use the same brand of bread. I have to use the same size of bread. I have to put the bread out the same day, the same second. I have to keep it out for the same amount of time. I've got to keep all those things the same so that my results are 100% accurate, valid, and reliable. And all those words mean is I'm getting the best result I possibly can. And the only way to get the best result I possibly can is to keep everything constant, everything the same, except the thing that I changed, that independent variable. That way I really know if that independent variable is having an effect on the growth of bread. If I start changing too many other things, then I don't know if it was the temperature that affected it, if it was the brand of bread that affected it, if it was the time I left it out. So that's really why I've got to keep everything else the same except for what I change so that my results are accurate. Okay, so those are our 3 variables, and now I went kind of fast, and the great thing about these videos is that you have the ability to pause it, you have the ability to rewind it, so if you didn't really hear something or you don't understand it, please rewatch it again. Rewatch it as many times as you need to in order for it to stick in your brain. The more times we read something, the more times we look at something, think about movies that you watch, video games that you watch, the more you play it, the more you watch it, the more you remember it, the better it sticks in your brain. The more you listen to music, every time you listen to a song, you remember more of the lyrics by heart. So please rewatch the video, rewind it if you're not sure. Anytime we have one of these videos, and they'll always be up on the website. So if we're studying for a test and you need to go back and watch a video, it's a great resource to study for your quizzes and your test. So the next thing that you're going to do now is you're going to turn to page 10, and I'm going to put up some notes in order for you to take in your journal. It's basically summarizing everything we just talked about our independent variable, our dependent variable, and our controls. Once you have taken the notes that I put up, then you are more than welcome to press stop and have a great night, get some sleep, and I will see your beautiful smiling faces in the morning. Okay, so don't forget to take your notes. Tomorrow morning when you come in, I will be asking you to open to page 10, and I will make sure that you have the notes, including the examples. All right? All right, so now is the time where you take your notes. So remember, we are on page 10, that page we skipped today in class, and our title is Identifying Variables. The date is September 9th, 2014, and of course, you're going to put this where? Yes, absolutely, in your table of contents. So after you get your title, go ahead and press play. So you're probably going to want to pause it to write your title down. And then once you press play, you'll see the notes we're going to put on that page. Okay, so once you have your title, the date, and you have put it in your table of contents, you will turn it sideways. We're going to make a little graphic organizer for our 3 types of variables. We have our independent, our dependent, and our control. So here's the definition and the example that I just talked about with you. So you're just going to go ahead and get your notes down in your journal for you to reference and study throughout the year. If you can see it just like it is, then go ahead and pause it and go ahead and copy the notes down. If you're having trouble seeing it, then stay tuned. I will zoom in for each of the variables. Okay, so our independent variable, remember that's what you change in the experiment, in the actual setup. That is the temperature of the bread in our example we talked about in class the other day. The dependent variable, okay, that's the result of your experiment. That's what observed and measured. It's what happens because of what you changed in the experiment setup, because of what you changed in that independent variable. So our example here is how much mold grows. Because I changed the temperature of the bread, it's going to affect how much mold is going to grow on that bread. And then our control variable, so that's everything that stays the same during your experiment. So just like we talked about, the brand of bread, the size of the bread, and the time left out. Okay, so once you have your notes looking just like this, then you are good to go and you are ready for class tomorrow. And I can't wait to test your knowledge and see what you have learned about independent variables, dependent variables, and control variables. Have a wonderful, wonderful night.